Well, the speakers as well are all over the world today. I will just briefly introduce them before we start. Joining us from Kyoto in Japan is Dr. Juichi Yamagiwa, a world-famous primatologist who was also president of Kyoto University from 2014 to 2020. He was president of the International Primatological Society, 2008 to 12, and editor-in-chief of the journal Primates from 2010 to 2014. He's also served as president of the Japan Association of National Universities and on a number of other university-related policy committees. And he's currently the director of the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature. And then joining us from the US, we have Dr. Karen Strier. She is, I don't know how you pronounce this, Vilas Research Professor and Irvin DeVore Professor of Anthropology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she is an expert in the endangered northern Muriquis monkey. I hope I've got that right. And has done a lot of work, not only researching on it, but also been very active in conservation. She too was president of the International Primatological Society. She still is, since 2016. And she's a member of the US National Academy of Science and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And so this shows you what the timeline is going to be. We'll have the two presentations, and then I hope we'll have time for a bit of discussion between the two speakers, and then we'll go to Q&A with the audience. So over to you, Dr. Yamagiwa, to start us off.
Okay, thank you very much for introduction. Well, I have studied gorillas in Africa for more than 40 years. So I would like to give an overview of human social evolution from the perspective of a gorilla and explore the future path after COVID-19. We have suffered from COVID-19 until now, and we have to keep social distance with wearing masks to avoid risk of infection. Furthermore, even when this virus is quelled, it's doubtful that we will easily be able to return to the way things were before this point. Along with the formulation of a robust plan to combat infectious diseases, considerations must be made as soon as possible for what a new economic order, new international relations, and new lifestyles will look like. Now we find the Earth is not our property, but the planet of microorganisms and virus. Many viral genes are integrated in wild animals. Recent population growth and globalism combined with ecosystem destruction due to increased human activity and climate change are the main cause of this pandemic. What precautions we can take is to avoid gathering, sitting room, and close contact. However, these conditions constitute basic human life, and their avoidance will decrease our daily activities socially and economically. In the first place, from the evolutionary viewpoints, our brain has developed with increasing group size, which is facilitated by communication with close contact. The human brain is 3 times as large as gorilla's brain. I think many of you believe high intelligence created by language to be the main cause of brain enlargement. But it is not true. Looking at the order in which human unique characteristics appeared in the process of 7 million years human evolution, the human brain began to grow 2 million years ago and reached the size of the modern human brain 400,000 years ago. In contrast, languages first appeared only 70,000 years ago. Like this. Robin Dunbar, a British anthropologist primatologist, found a positive correlation in non-human primates between the neocortex ratio and average group size. It means that their brains grew as the number of peers increased, that is, in response to increasing social complexity. The human brain may have followed this trend. Based on this hypothesis, the average group size of fossil humans is 30 at the beginning of brain enlargement and grew up to 150 according to the present brain size. Interestingly, the average community size of the present hunter-gatherers is 150. So we can estimate that the modern humans lived as a group of 150 people until the beginning of agriculture 12,000 years ago. Then what kind of communication did human beings make their brain bigger before the advent of language? Humans are phylogenetically grouped as hominidae with great apes, orangutans, gorillas, and chimpanzees. Among great apes, I learned it from gorillas. In contrast with monkeys who usually avoid prolonged eye contact, gorillas often stare at each other in close proximity. Chimpanzees also appear in various social contexts. Humans have face-to-face contacts so often as well as they do, but we usually keep social distance. Why? I think many of you believe that we do for conversation. The real reason is that we read others' feelings by the movement of eyes. This figure shows eyes of monkeys on the left side and eyes of apes on the right side. You can see the distinct difference of ours from both monkeys and apes, that is, the presence of white part in the human eyes. Thanks to this, we can read the feelings of the other person from the minute movement of the eyes. Because all apes do not have the white part, only humans have evolved this feature, probably far before the emergence of language. Face-to-face interactions with reading eye movement may have increased our abilities of empathy and sympathy. Why and how human ancestors increased empathic ability? I think that it was fostered by food sharing and communal breeding. This phylogenetic tree based on 68 species represent all major taxonomic groups of primates. The presence of food sharing with offspring, left column, and food sharing among adults, right column, are marked in black. The absence is marked in white. Two distinct trends are found. First, food sharing among adults is only observed in species of food sharing with offspring. Second, food sharing among adults is observed in the particular phylogenetic tree, such as great apes and small New World monkeys. Great apes are characterized by siblings, and small New World monkeys have twins or triplet infants with communal care. This suggests that heavy burden of caretaking offspring may promote food sharing. We have conducted research on western lowland gorillas in lowland tropical forest where they prefer diverse fruits and found food sharing among adult gorillas like chimpanzees. Food sharing in humans is spread in wider context. We use foods as a social tool and for communication. We decorate a feeding place by preparing tables and chairs, various dishes, cups and bottles, tablecloths, and other accessories. We have various costumes and table manners according to cultures, but basic style of food sharing is common across cultures. It's amazing. Another feature unique to humans are life history traits. A comparison of growth among great apes and humans shows 4 periods in all taxa. Infant period is defined as suckling. Juveniles are able to eat solid foods as adults. Adult individuals participate in reproduction. Older age may weaken or cease reproductive ability. Adding to them, human has two special periods. First, humans in child period are already weaned but cannot eat solid food as adults. Second, adolescents have ability of reproduction but do not yet engage in reproduction. Moreover, modern humans have long lifespan after menopause. Why, how, and when did these human-specific features emerge in human evolutionary history? Some important behavior innovations possibly occurred in the evolutionary history of humans. In the savanna, where early hominids extended their range, dispersed food and high predation pressure may have forced them to select safe feeding place for immatures. Bipedalism may have promoted such tasks as using hand for transporting foods. Early weaning stops suckling to resume ovulation of mothers and to reduce intervals interval. It increased fecundity to supplement increased mortality of babies. Then about 2 million years ago, when brain size started to increase, somatic growth speeded down to provide much energy to brain growth. Human babies are born with large body fat deposit as insurance for the development brain. Such changes required cooperative breeding and pair bonding, while risky environments strengthen kin-based alliance among males. It possibly led to the creation of a multi-level community structure consisting of families as observed in modern hunter-gatherer societies. This social structure might have increased the resilience to severe conditions in the new environments and led them in their first steps out of Africa. Human populations at the beginning of agriculture 12,000 years ago was 5 to 8 million. Then it has increased rapidly through industrial revolution and information revolution, reached almost 8 billion. However, our brain size has not increased or even decreased during this time. The communication revolution created a global world by taking the knowledge in the human brain out and sharing it with others. However, it should be noted that only the part of informatized intelligence can be taken out of the brain. Emotional part, which makes our feeling and intuitional decision, still remains in the brain. It is the critical period for us humans and the Earth. If we continue to rely largely on ICT and AI, we will live in the virtual world rather than the reality. We must reconsider connection between lives and new normal of human life under and after COVID-19. Today is an era of anxiety. Safe environments do not fully provide us peace of mind. Individuals are separated from the community. Everyone is requested self-actualization and self-responsibility. The world is global, but has no center, becoming flat and homogeneous. People spend time not on physical connections, but on brain connections through SNS. I'm afraid that digital society constructed by ICT and biotechnology will lead us to enlarge economic, social, and biological disparities and to destruction that exceeds the limit of Earth's capacity. We have learned many things from lessons by COVID-19. Many social interactions necessary for daily life are refrained. And we remind importance of unfair labor practices such as childcare, laundry, meal preparation, long-term care. We found that much of our work can be done at home and learned that various events such as sports and concerts that we have considered as leisure, fun, are indispensable to our lives. We should expand commons and sharing. Internet system provides us global commons, and we can regard the universal insurance and free tuition as commons. People are starting to move to the countryside to avoid concentration and seek safety and health. We should use the appropriate communication according to group size in wise combination of ICT and five senses. We are now entering an era of new nomad, like the past hunter-gatherers way of life. Young people do not prefer lifetime employment, but seek the double-track life, changing jobs or having multiple jobs, which will promote reduction of property and sharing economy. Labor will shift from making money to finding meaning in life with the unique characteristics of land. These trends will lead us to think locally and act globally, instead of think globally, act locally. Digital transformation has forced us to informatize and homogenize everything. But we must remind that diversity and uniqueness of culture will create innovation. We should not lose the property of cultural diversity and should save this asset at any event using our high-level empathy and sympathy fostered in our evolutionary history. Well, thanks for your attention. It's my end.
So thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you, and also wonderful connections with what Dr. Yamagiwa just spoke about, because I'm going to talk about what the societies of New World monkeys can tell us about our own. So before I start, though, I just want to put into perspective the fact that the primates of the Americas, of Central and South America, represent a third of the world's primates. And this is important to keep in mind because many of the world's primates, 75%, are at some level of threat or declining population. And that's true also of the New World primates, which are divided into 5 different families representing a huge range of diversity, from the largest Muriquis, which I'll tell you a lot more about in a few minutes, weighing up to 12 kilograms, down to the smallest pygmy marmoset at 100 grams. And one of the reasons why we're so interested in the New World monkey diversity is because they were so neglected for so many years in the history of primatology. As Juichi spoke about, the apes have always been a strong phylogenetic and behavioral comparative model for humans. And research has focused intensively on them to look at our ancestral evolutionary pathways for behavior. It's also focused on the old world monkeys like macaques and baboons because of their ecological parallels as semi-terrestrial monkeys that would have used the ground the way that we know our ancestral humans began to do so. But it's really only been in recently that the New World monkeys and other primates have been increasingly studied. And in fact, if we look at the history of this, in the first 50 years of primatology, only one New World primate, the howler monkey, ranked among the top 10 of the primates that had been studied. And in the last few years, we've seen that this has increased so that nowadays chimpanzees are still the most popular, most well-studied primate, but 4 out of the top 10 primates are New World primates. And this is important because it's more representative of their representation in the primate order. It was really in the 1980s that field research on New World primates got widely underway. And this image is from the 1988 meeting of the International Primatological Society, which was held in Brasilia. And it actually represented to some degree what we knew about and what we were trying to learn about New World primates. It was known from a lot of field and captive studies that the small group of marmosets and tamarins, known as the callitrichids, have very unusual reproductive patterns. And Juichi mentioned this in his talk, the family focus with their very fast life histories, the production of twins, sometimes twice a year, and the necessity, because of this, for high levels of alloparental care, help from fathers and other group members. And to some degree, reproductive competition, which enables a single breeding pair to produce all the offspring in the group, and other group members join as helpers. So it's very common to see among this group of primates, the males carrying infants, the females basically only carrying the infants when it's time to nurse, and family groups that are very strongly bonded and associate with one another with quite variable patterns for long-term dispersal. It was also known from the howler monkeys, which have been studied in many locations, that they live in very diverse kinds of social groups and composition, ranging from single male to multi-male groups with bisexual or sex-biased dispersal. And then a lot of this variation corresponded with demography as well as ecological patterns. And in fact, we can see how valuable that would be. We've seen that at my field site in southeastern Brazil, where a yellow fever outbreak a few years ago caused the decimation of the populations, many of the populations of howler monkeys, to the point that we ended up with only about 10% of them surviving. And it's only been a few years later that the groups have actually reconfigured themselves, that their societies have sorted themselves out. So in the 1980s, there was a widespread shift to looking across primates at broader comparisons. And this shift led me to study the northern Muriquis, shown here. And it's actually been, as Dr. Yamagiwa gave a perspective from the eyes of a gorilla, I could say that I've been, much of what I'll talk about in the future here will be about what it's like, what the primate world looks like through the eyes of a Muriquis. So one key factor is that female dispersal is actually common across primates. In many primate species, the apes and many New World primates, females leave their natal groups to reproduce in unfamiliar groups. And in these societies, and this is true in chimpanzees and bonobos and Muriquis, spider monkeys, the males stay in their natal groups in patrilineal societies for the duration of their lives. This bias in male and kinship has important, in dispersal patterns, has important implications for kinship systems. So you can see that all the blue dots, most of the blue dots are really clustered together at the bottom of this cladogram. These are the macaques and the baboons that were studied as ecological comparisons for humans. And chimpanzees, having female biased dispersal with male patrilines, were thought to be the different pattern and more similar to humans. But as we began to study primates across the order, we saw that there was much more variation and that patterns of both female biased dispersal with male patrilines and bisexual dispersal, where kin bonds are weak, except among parents and their offspring, are more common across the primates. And these have important implications for how primate social organization and how we think about our own social organization might evolve, because they have implications for our social relationships as well as our mating patterns. And it also has implications for, at a practical level, for how we might engage in management for conservation purposes, through processes of housing animals or through translocation efforts. Another factor that Muriquis really brought to light and contributed to a reconsideration of other primates was that not all sociality is mediated agonistically. So in most of the old world primates, males and females are sexually dimorphic, but in Muriquis, males and females are similar in body size. And this allows for peaceful egalitarian societies without any evidence of hierarchy among related males, as well as between males and females. So in Muriquis society, males maintain close associations. They spend more than 60% of their time in close proximity to one another, and they have lots of friends. I mentioned that males and females are similar in body size as well as canine size, and this gives females an advantage that females in other species don't always have because they can't be harassed or intimidated by males. And this feeds back into a great deal of tolerance during mating with very low reproductive skew, the lowest reproductive skew that we've seen in any primates so far. And altogether, their peaceful societies, their egalitarian social organization, and their promiscuous behaviors have led to the nickname of Muriquis as the hippie monkeys. But it's also important that these factors are interrelated. So the high tolerance among males may be promoted by this lifelong maternal investment that mothers have in their sons, not just one son, but in all of their sons. That also contributes and favors and feeds back into their very long lifespans. And in fact, Muriquis have one of the slowest life histories among any non-ape primate. In fact, their life histories are more like those of apes than they are like other monkeys. Females leave their natal groups at 6 years of age prior to the onset of puberty. A few years later, they give birth to their first infant when they're about 9 years old, which is really old for a monkey. And their birth intervals are about 3 years, which means that during this time, mothers are taking close care, really extended maternal care of their offspring. And during these years of contact with their mothers, infants have a lot of exposure to their mother's social networks. They see who their mothers are interacting with, as well as if their mothers are afraid of anybody. They also have time to learn not just what foods to eat, but also the social conventions. And I love this photo, which was just, I paired up and emerged because they show these young animals mimicking the handshaking of the adult females on the left. They also have exposure to maternal siblings. And so this is the beginning or the opportunities for extended family structures. And of course, because males stay in their natal group for lives, sons and their mothers are together for lives. And males are also together with their fathers for their entire life, but we don't know if they recognize them. So this lifelong overlap also means that even though females leave their natal groups, if their daughters come back or their granddaughters come back, that sons may be exposed to their great-grandmothers. But again, we don't know if they recognize them. This dynamic between strong sociality and slow life histories provides the means for the transmission and maintenance of local traditions across generations. And we know in human society how important this is for primates as well, because this interaction across generation buffers them against the selective events that occur at intervals that are greater than their lifespan, so that they don't have to be learning new things every time. We see this in the tool use that has been well documented in the bearded capuchin monkeys, where just like in chimpanzees and other primates that use tools, young animals observe closely what their parents and other group members are doing. We also see information sharing transmitted across generations about the presence of valuable resources, such as the last remaining water sources during an extended drought that it was the older animals that led the group to. Over the years, we've seen tremendous behavioral variability, flexibility. And this is a phenomenon that characterizes all primates, but is particularly notable in neural monkeys. So we see in the Muriquis, as the group doubled in size, their entire pattern of interaction shifted from one in which they lived in cohesive groups to one in which they split up into fission-fusion societies. And with the second big increase in group size, that this was happening over time when the group doubled again, we saw the increase in the vertical use of more niches, and they began to come down to the ground. Now, This made a lot of sense in terms of habitat saturation because the Muriquis, like many primates, live in forest fragments, which have limited space. So when the population grows and there's no place else to go, they have to use more three-dimensional space. And they use it to cross barren areas in the forest. But they also started coming down to the ground to feed, and they started using some of the dirt roads and trails that we used as well. All the other sympatric primates also use the ground to feed occasionally, but the Muriquis took it to a completely different level where they were walking around bipedally, carrying food with them. As you can see, their babies got to ride and learned about the experience of being on the ground. And they began to spend a lot of time on the ground just relaxing. That is non-essential ground use. Here's a male who's not threatening another with his gaping mouth, but is just yawning. And you can see they do have canines, but they're no bigger than those of females. This use of fragments and anthropogenic landscapes is something that seems to have been really important in the history of primate field research in the New World. And in fact, just a keyword search in the literature from 1940 to 2010 showed that researchers writing about New World monkeys talked about fragmentation, put fragmentation in their keywords 3 times more often than those of people working in other parts of the world. And this may reflect that studies of New World primates were initially much more focused on ecological and local adaptations to local conditions, or it may reflect the fact that a lot of the initial research done on New World primates was done by primatologists from these countries, and it still is today. The Latin American Primatological Society is a very active and vibrant group of researchers. These primates have had a lot of exposure and a lot of experience and have manifested a lot of adaptations to these anthropogenic disturbances. And this is a good thing too, because they need to be able to use disturbed habitats, and it's one of the factors that is the greatest constraint to them. But it's also the case that they have learned how to colonize naturally regenerating habitat. And it is amazing in many parts of southeastern Brazil and in other areas of South America where I have visited to see forests areas that had been cleared for pasture or crops and were left to regrow, how much regeneration can occur naturally if there's still a forest nearby. And I think this is a really encouraging sign for the future. And the Muriquis have learned how to use this space. So overall, and true for Muriquis as well as many other primates, we see some behavioral patterns that show great flexibility. They're facultative. They change in response to local ecological and demographic conditions. For the Muriquis, this was their grouping patterns, as well as their use of vertical niches, which have become, by all measures, as much of a tradition as anything that we would consider with tool use. We've watched it spread through the entire population from group to group with the females as they move. But they've also have some behavior patterns that are very stable, resistant to change. One has been their peaceful egalitarian society, despite the fact that the population at one point was 7 times larger than it was 40 years ago. They still retain their peacefulness by fissioning and avoiding close contact with one another, competitive contests. And the fact that they have female dispersal, which again has been really resistant to change. And we see these patterns of flexibility and resilience among all the other species of primates that we've looked at. So what New World monkey societies teach us? First, behavioral diversity is much greater than was thought in the 1970s and before. We see this every time we have more studies of new primates or more longer term studies of other primates. Behavioral flexibility and cooperation are much more common across the primate order and are highly adaptive in almost every consideration, almost every context, something that we humans could take to heart. And peaceful societies can persist over time and under extreme conditions. And I say extreme conditions because Muriquis are considered to be critically endangered. There are only about 1,000 of them left in the world. About 25 to 30% of them live in the population I've been showing you. And yet, despite all the challenges against them here and elsewhere, their peaceful societies have persisted. Peacefulness, persistence, and resilience. I think these are the things that New World primates have taught us, that they're the features that they can show us about our own lives, about human societies. And in this world of the Anthropocene, with so many changes that are going on, there's absolutely nothing that we could do to, we need all the guidance we can. And therefore, we need to think about how we're going to protect these primates and continue to learn from them. Thank you so much for your attention. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you.
Great, thank you very much. So, Dr. Yamagiwa, are you going to respond to that? I mean, one of the issues for us all, I suppose, is going to be what can we learn about how we are going to behave, you know, in the longer term as humans.
It's very interesting to compare African rainforest and South American rainforest. It's parallelly primates evolved for a million years ago. And so, you know, for example, as Karen pointed out, chimpanzees and Muriqui is very similar features, of social features, fission fusion and female dispersal, and you know, well, strong preference to fruits. But it's, you know, there are some differences between them because, you know, in African rainforest, some species primates are terrestrially evolved, such as baboons and chimpanzees and gorillas are terrestrial. They usually move on the ground. But in Amazonia's forest, almost all the primate species are arboreal. They move in trees. But as Karen stated, that, you know, the recent destruction of forests, they descend on the ground to move. That is very interesting. So what happened out then? Is there any change in the social structure or relationships between individuals or some, you know, behavior?
We were fortunate. That's a great question. We were really fortunate to catch this transition just when it was happening and to be able to document it. So when the animals first started coming down to the ground more than was usual, and because they always came down to drink, they'd come down and then they'd run out to drink, or sometimes if there was a gap in the canopy. So it's not that they had never used the ground, but when they started using the ground for longer periods or for what we call non-essential activities, like there are trees all over the place, but they come down to the ground so they can rest. Why did they do that suddenly? And we think that it was something that was stimulated by demographic pressure. They were coming down increasingly to the ground to eat. And we did see a huge coincidental rise in mortality around the same time that they were coming to the ground. And although we can't directly say that the mortality was a direct cause of ground use, it probably was because in some cases we began to find more evidence of Muriqui remains in the scat samples from some of the resident felines, like jaguar chiricas, which are like ocelots. And we also know we have puma at the field site as well, in this forest as well. So it's more dangerous for them on the ground, not to mention things like pathologies, parasites, and some of the kinds of disease vectors that you were talking about for the African apes as well. But I think that the social behavior became really interesting. And I was super fascinated by that because if you think about moving from a three-dimensional environment where the number of animals who can interact with one another is kind of constrained by space, you have to be able to be in the same tree, and the branch has to be strong enough. You're on the ground, you're not constrained by space. And so I had expected that there would be a larger groups forming, larger subgroups, and that didn't really happen. What did happen that was that the transmission of the behavior really followed social network lines. So males started coming down to the ground first, and then females would come down if the males were there. They all look around. So we put some camera traps in the forest to see what they did when we weren't there, because I had this idea that maybe the monkeys were using us, humans, as buffers. If we were there, they knew they were safe from predators. And in fact, when they come down to the ground when people aren't there, it's really surreal, because they stand up and they hug each other and they walk around, but they're very, very vigilant. They're looking all over. And I'm not sure if they're looking for each other or if they're looking for danger. But I would say those are the biggest concerns, the biggest risks. I think that this idea that New World primates, their bodies are so adapted for arboreal life, and that's certainly true of the Muriquis, as you saw. And yet, in many ways, they, unlike chimpanzees, they can stand, they can do full leg extension. You know, their legs can be perfectly straight, and part of that is related to their flexible lumbar region, which is associated with their prehensile tail, which chimpanzees don't have. So it's a hugely fascinating anatomical, functional, morphological question as well, that Muriquis may be able to walk bipedally more efficiently than chimpanzees.
I think that, gender equality between male and females, it's surprising, it's very equal, interacted. And well, in chimpanzees, males is always dominant to females. But in Muriqui, it's very equal.
That's right.
So it's surprising why they can develop the male dominance to females.
I think some of that is because of the similarity in their body size and canine size, which may have evolved, this is all speculation, but it may have evolved because of life in the trees, very much like the gibbon, which are also monomorphic in body size and canine size, and have very similar forms of locomotion, and they're similar in body size, although gibbons don't have the prehensile tails. So it's always called gibbons are like Muriquis without tails. But but what we see, so the constraints on males to get bigger and still retain the same kind of rapid energy locomotion may have limited the ability for males to for selection pressure to increase for males. And at the same time, the social dynamics of female dispersal and male philopatry, which seems to be a really conservative trait linked to phylogeny in all of the Italians, all of the Muriquis close relatives, just like it is with the chimpanzees and bonobos, may be something that actually inhibits some of their competition with one another, compounded with their inability to dominate, to assert their dominance, physical dominance over females. But you were mentioning chimpanzees, but of course, Muriquis might be in this way, in some respects, more similar to bonobos, where although males are still dominant to females, there's still hierarchical relationships. The roles of females in influencing their sons play a huge role. And we see that in Muriquis as well, where mothers who are able to basically live long lives while their sons are still in the group, those the sons don't have very much different reproductive success from one another, but the mothers, the grandmothers of the offspring, they have a lot of offspring, a lot of grand offspring. And so we may be seeing a multi-generational level of competition that mothers achieve their success not only through their own reproduction, but by helping their sons, and therefore contribute to maintaining the peaceful relationships among their sons, which is, again, this real extended family question. And I was going to ask you then about gorillas, because you also have strong family groups and animals living in groups for long periods of time. Do you think that these multi-generational interactions also occur in gorillas?
Oh, well, social structure of gorillas have two types. Well, one is always one male group, because all the sons disperse from their natal groups. And another type is males remain in the group to cooperate with fathers and their elder brothers. And that is very similar to Muriquis. There are two types. And it depends on the environmental situations. And, and it's infanticide can accelerate to form male groups, because some females choose the male groups to their security. So that's, environmental factors can influence their formation of two types of groups. That is very
so they show just as much variability as the New World primate monkeys that I was talking about. But if you had to speculate about what would gorilla social behavior be like if males and females were the same size?
Same size. Well,
is it even possible to imagine?
Well, but that depends on female choice, I guess.
Okay.
Because irrespective of male dominance, both gorillas, chimpanzees, and also Muriquis, spider monkeys, female dispersed from their native groups.
Right.
And that is similar. But male shape and sexual dimorphism is very different. So what's happened? Maybe female chose, some types of males. Muriquis female Muriquis chose the same size males, but female gorillas chose bigger size, large males to defend themselves, I guess, in the evolutionary pathway, I guess.
Yeah.
Don't you think so? And also, why in very rare species such as gorillas, chimpanzees, Muriquis, and spider monkeys, only female disperse? Because some females have a big risk to reproduce their offspring, because they have no helpers from their kin-related family groups, because they disperse their natal groups. They have no mothers, they have no sisters in the new group they transfer, and always depends on the male's help. So
actually, for Muriquis, it seems to depend more on their ability. They start to make friends with females, the other females, and they do it through their infant. They play with the infants, and then as they get slowly tolerated, and then the young adult males get interested in them for mating, and that's how they get integrated. So they're not, because I think for gorillas, the females are so dependent on males, and in Muriquis, they're really not dependent. I think Muriquis females don't select large males. Their selection is they have very strong seasonal reproduction. And I think that for them, it's more important to get pregnant than it is they care more about getting pregnant than they do about who they get pregnant with. And so therefore, it increases their promiscuity. Now, I suppose that males with particular traits that are better at fertilizing them should be selected for, but we have looked so hard for that and we just can't find the evidence. But I have to say too, that this is, and maybe this is a good segue to a big point that you made that I wanted to make sure we had a chance to talk about, which was the importance of, you pointed about thinking locally and acting globally. And for me, I just kept thinking about what humans have done to the natural world and how endangered so many primates are. And I know that your work and my work have connected a lot over the years through our concerns about primate conservation.
Yeah.
And I think that when we think about some of these kinds of how we're describing our study subjects, I think we always need to keep in mind the fact that, at least in my case, that I'm studying animals that are living in very different environments than the ones that we think they evolved under. And so we don't know if what we're looking at, and I think this is true for most primates, maybe not all, whether we're looking at primates that are in altered habitats, and therefore what we're seeing is how they're adapting to these altered habitats. It may be different from some of their evolutionary selective behavior. We don't know yet in some cases whether what we're seeing is truly adaptive. And that can be not just habitat loss, but also demographics. So you might have a beautiful forest, but if the animals have been hunted or have been affected by zoonotic diseases, as you talked about, then we might be looking at really different demographics than what would have occurred in their evolutionary history. And I find that to be one of the most challenging, but also the most interesting questions in primatology today. And in trying to connect, when we think about looking at primates as models for human evolution and human behavior, how we are interpreting the primates as if they're static, and we know they're not. We know that they have been changing and evolving, and that what we're observing today may or may not be these ancestral patterns that we're looking for in ourselves.
Thank you so much to both of you for sharing your insights with us, and thank you to all of the audience for coming along. Hope to see you next time. It's something very different. We're talking about vaccine resistance next week, but I think we're going to close it for today. So I hope to see you all soon.